So what we're going to walk through today is a little bit of a perspective. I have the pleasure now of running not just financial services as a vertical for NetApp, but covering the technical teams responsible for a collection of different verticals. And as part of that, we get a pretty good perspective on what's going on across industries, but we also get to look at what's NetApp's play in this. And one of the things we've done, certainly our customers have been working with us for quite a while now. We've really made a transformation as a company away from a traditional storage provider into a data company, right? And a lot of things we've done over the last 5 to 10 years to really drive into that model. And when we look at data and data in general, you have to kind of take a fundamentally different approach to it and look at from a different lens, what our customers across these industries are really trying to do. So one of the things we'll talk about today is we've done a lot of research in this space across verticals, but specifically around financial services. What's really the journey that a lot of these customers are going through, and then what's our role in that? So, Dave talked about this concept of digitization and the digital transformation, which, by the way, is not a new term at all. Our customers are going through a digital transformation for the last 10 years. But what's really changing now is the acceleration of that digital transformation, right? And the things that our customers are looking at for value, and some of the things that they're seeing in their marketplaces that are really challenges for them. Right, and we talked a lot about the customer's expectations, but really, what is the things that these companies are doing? Certainly your companies are doing to try to address some of these things, right? So, and from a disruption perspective, financial services is probably one of the biggest markets that we're seeing really, seeing this disruption at a scale that we're not seeing across all of them, and certainly the investments from that, from a traditional spend, is certainly changing. So one of the first things we looked at. And we talked, Dave certainly brought up a lot of this, is the customer expectations are fundamentally changing, right? So the way you used to work with a bank to the way you expect to work with a bank in the future are changing. And a lot of that has to do with, people who are adjusted. I mean, I'll give you, my parents would never, do any kind of transaction over a phone, just nothing they would do. Right? And they were crazy that we would do, talk on the phone to something, but yet still do a financial transaction, right? But my niece, who's just graduating college right now, has never stepped into a bank branch, nor will she ever, right? And that's not something that she values when you start talking about financial services for her. In fact, she's just finished graduating college. She's doing her first summer internship out in San Francisco. And she's actually making a paycheck. I think it's the first time she's ever actually gotten a paycheck before. And in getting that paycheck, I went through it. I said, well, you're going to put this in an account. You're going to start investing. What about, you thinking about, opening a 401k? And she says, well, isn't there a spot I just go to and someone just takes care of all that for me, right? That's the experience that they want. They want a different type of experience than the way they've had in the past. And they're starting to drive these new models. And when you think about the traditional banks and the financial services institutions, right? They're locked into a customer base that's really starting to fall off as far as what the experience is versus a new market that's being generated and accelerating as they get more and more people in this space. And they're also seeing a lot more competitors in this space. They've talked about a lot of them. I mean, one of the ones like Adam, where Adam's a company where they're offering mortgages online. I mean, who would have ever, got a mortgage through someone you've never met, got advice that's done through a computer screen, and then right from there got approved and then got the money sent to them so they can go buy a house, right? It's a completely different experience than what people have traditionally done, but that's a company that's built a model around that, right? They went from, and I think one of the things that Dave mentioned was they've accelerated their ability to bring customers online. I mean, Adam was able to go from, zero to, I think they've got about 500,000 people that have used their services, and they did that in a short time, 2.5 years, right? So these are the types of experience they're going. And that's really when you talk about the digital landscape of what people are working on, that's the attach rates they're seeing, the ability to grow a customer base very, very rapidly through a set of services that they're able to create and able to manage, right? So we see this as a big challenge for them. I mean, we talked about Monzo a little bit. That's another company. The other thing we're seeing across the financial service providers in this experience is things like even in trading and financial advising, the whole concept of robo-advisors, right? There's a whole new set of companies that are starting up in this market that are all around robo-advising. And if you really think of what they are, it's a collection of data scientists that's writing models, right, on how, based on some characteristics that they've defined about the customer profile, giving them all this financial investment advice. right? And they do that. Companies like Smartfolio and a few others that are out there that are starting to build into these models, right? And this is something that's, a challenge for certainly a lot of the banks. And a lot of what they're doing around this is all about the data they're able to maintain, right? The value of a bank traditionally has been, the vault and the amount of branches they had. The new value of that is the amount of data they have. In fact, data now, when you talk about the value of organizations, balance sheets used to be around property and real estate and all those other elements to it. Data is now, and the amount of data you have could dramatically change the value of a balance sheet of a company, right? And a lot of that's around how do I then take that data and make and drive value out of it. So we're really seeing a big change in that customer experience and that driving it. The other piece that we realized through the market research that we did was the new technologies are really starting to change the business model. So the technology adoption and technology enablement is a new thing that we've identified that's really starting to make some changes, whether that's things like blockchain as a new technology, artificial intelligence. And I was presenting at a forum a month ago, and we talked about artificial intelligence, and someone raised his hand and said, we've been doing this stuff forever, right? The difference is the amount of data that they have available and that they need to be able to manage through is just incrementally increasing, right, exponentially, right? And you're starting to see more and more data available. It's what do I do with that data, and then how do I use that to drive these new business models, right? And that's where we're starting to see. It's not just about the endpoint of that data back to the consumer. It's about how you're using data to change your business model and then make those adjustments towards, what I'm going to do next. And the other thing that we looked at, and the challenge for a lot of these transformations in financial services is, you guys are data stewards whether you want to be or not, right? The concept of now generating and managing and maintaining this data, it's just as important as the currency itself that you're managing for your customers, right? And the lifeblood of a lot of these companies is really about the data and then how do they manage that data. So whether it's, traditional compliance and regulatory challenge that you have, or whether that's now the data privacy concerns that are being applied, GDPR. GDPR was mentioned for years. We've been talking about it. In fact, at NetApp, we had someone that specialized in GDPR, and we were bringing her out to banks for a couple of years, educating people. And all of a sudden, GDPR came out, and everybody's now all over it and trying to figure out what's going on with it, right? How do they manage to it? How do they build business models around GDPR, right? So you'll see more and more of those types of things. But data privacy has now become almost a expectation of how and certainly the things that have gone on recently with Facebook and some others, we certainly find out that people are more conscious about how their data is being used in the companies they do business with. And it's going more of a challenge for a lot of our customers, right? It's certainly financial services being that when you think about banking, you can trust you with your money, but can I trust you with my data itself, right? We're even seeing companies now that are providing data services that look at how is anybody else that you do business with managing your data, right? Whether that's information about yourself or information about what you do. So there's a number of new models that we're seeing develop, but this is a major challenge for a lot of our customers in the transformation. I think, one thing Dave mentioned in the session before this was, what are some of the inhibitors, things that are holding back some of these changes in the new models? And a lot of it's just the legacy regulatory things that are impediments or certainly the walls that you have to get through in order to figure out how to get into that next model, right? So a lot of challenges in that space. So what are things that we see customers of ours and industry leaders that are really driving? What are the things that they're able to do, right? So one of the things we're finding is they're really able, customers that can get and manage data and leverage data as a core principle to their changes and their evolution, they're really able to reinvent that customer experience, right? Whether that's through building new applications, new models. I mean, Dave did a good job really talking about creating these small groups that innovate. We've got some customers we work with that instead of trying to bring the entire organization along, they'll create very small pockets, provide a very specific endpoint they want, and then go manage that endpoint, right? And that's something we're seeing more and more of, right? Customers that really pride that hyper focus. One other thing that was interesting in this analysis we did is a lot of the universities these days that are creating, so business schools that are out there. In fact, I was at the Notre Dame Business School over the summer, and that school there actually has a data science practice. It's not part of their comp sci or their IT curriculum. It's part of their business curriculum, right? A big part of that school is they are bringing in folks business people, and they're applying data analytic technologies and data analytic studies, right, into what they do. It's a core part of the business, right? A lot of that's around how do we manage and use data to do things in financial services like recreate and change that customer experience. The other thing is when they apply data, they're able to accelerate their ability to create new models and create new packages and products, right? And it's all about increasing their ability to drive more productivity, more revenue, right? So our companies we're seeing that are doing that can do that. And the other one is they're also able to secure their customer information a lot better. The more data they have about their customers and how they're using it, right, they're able to drive a much better experience for that. And at the end of the day, provide the safeguards or the guarantees to those consumers that they do have the right things in place for these consumers so that they can continue building that trust, not just with their money, but with their personalities. So a couple of things that we found in some of these studies. 6x improvement in operational efficiencies by leveraging data. Right? So whether that's operational efficiencies inside, better ways to manage it, better information about the systems themselves to get more effective and more efficient, we find that they are 3 times more profitable in new customer acquisition. Right? By leveraging data and data elements, right, and creating these new services, they're able to attract more people, right, into there. And like I said, 3x growth in their customer base, 2x improvement in the top line, less operational overhead, less overhead in the longevity of it. Sometimes it's easy to get a product out the gates, but how do I manage that product over time, right? Is it more expensive, day 2, day 3 than it was in day 1? And the other one is a much greater ability to drive new product innovations, right? And a lot of that's around the ability to change and modify and adjust into those new models. So when we look at this, we drive into really 5 categories, right? Everyone from the data resistors that are driving against this, and so the darker boxes are an industry view of this, right? So an industry landscape of what are the different stages that our customers are in across all industries. Data resistors all the way to data thrivers. Data thrivers are the ones who use data as a natural starting point for how they think about innovation, right? And how they think about changing their company and their products. The good thing is financial services leads the pack. So out of all the industries we looked at, one of the highest ones was financial services, right? The other one actually that was the high was the media companies, the media houses. But the 16% of the companies in financial services would consider themselves data thrivers, right? And that's across the board. That's everything from some of the smaller startup fintechs to the larger investment houses and retail banks. But 16%, which is a good number. So what that tells us is the investments that we make in our ability to work with financial services, we can really make a difference. So that's why financial services really is a big focus area for NetApp as a company, one of our most important verticals, which we mentioned earlier. The reason for that is we really believe that this is a market and a vertical that's really going to excel when we look at these things, and really using data aggressively, right, to disrupt that market. So what are some of the challenges that we've identified and that we're trying to help with? Thin budgets, right? We talked about the whole keep the lights on spend versus the innovation spend, right? And in fact, it's a temporary save you'll get when I can reinvest 10% in that. You wind up paying that price, and that investment gets smaller and smaller, right? So when we look at that, what are the challenges that we can do, and how can we help that, right? Lack of resources, the demand for app development, because at the end of the day, a lot of this requires, a new set of applications, a new set of services that you're going to be delivering to your consumers, right? But how do you provide those right people? There is not enough talent out there in this space, whether it's data scientists or app developers that are going to help you, right? According to Gartner, by 2021, it's going to be a supply and demand, right? We already know anybody who's employed data scientists, and we have some on our staff. They're expensive, right? And good ones are really hard to find. Certainly ones that can do what you want them to do and do it at a scale. They work in very small groups, right? Give them just an output you want, and they'll come up with some pretty good results. But they're hard to find, and they're very expensive, right? And that problem's going to get even harder, right? And then how do you feed the funnel into those folks to make them as productive as you possibly can? And the other one is the skills shortages, right? I mean, you're seeing, I talked about the Notre Dame building this data science practice. Not every university has this yet, You'll see some of the more dominant universities. Stanford has a really big practice in here. Notre Dame and a few others. But it's still, there's a shortage of skill sets out there, right? And that still needs to be developed, right? So when you think about taking data and making that the lifeblood of the organizations through transformational aspects, right? Where do I find those things? So when we look at that, the other challenge is data in itself is not a static entity any longer, right? Days and days, we always were able to confine data into the walls of a data center. That just doesn't, it's not the case anymore. The ability to create data and then, mature data, from beginning to end is a challenge, right? We talk about birth like the life cycle of a human, right? You give birth to it one day, right? It goes through its childhood where you're trying to figure out how to manage it, right? Teenage years are what they are, and then eventually you have to sunset it if you ever sunset it, right? One of the big challenges we see in the data landscape is what do I keep around? How do I manage it? And then when should I no longer have it, right? And the challenge there is distributed, right? It's got dynamic natures to it, right? The way you originally created it is maybe not the way it's used, in a year from now or 2 years from now, right? Or where it's actually going to live, because it's completely diverse as far as the types and locations of it, right? So a lot of challenges when you think about it, but you have to build strategies around that as you think about accelerating your digital transformations. So one of the things that some of the challenges we're finding in financial services are, running these new applications and developing new applications aren't necessarily being looked at to be run inside of the walls of a traditional IT environment, right? In fact, if you go to your application developers or your business owners, and some of you have, they're already looking at new sets of services, and you're competing with folks like the Amazons of the world and the Googles of the world, right? They provide a significant challenge that, or they have a certain amount of flexibility that you don't have, which is they're creating a service where they don't really understand what they need to provide. They're providing a very generic service based on their view of what they're trying to get done, not necessarily tailoring that to a specific business that you have to do, right? And that's one of the main challenges. We talked a little about a culture change. Well, if you've already provided as IT organizations a very set boutique service to your organizations. Why? Because that's the way they funded you, right? You're designed to create and manage services or applications specifically for how these businesses want to run. Yet, on the other side to that, the new application landscapes and these new areas that are being developed with the idea of using infrastructure that's available to them, and they want it faster, right? And they want it, for the most part, cheaper in their mindset. And what I mean by cheaper, when they look at it, cheap is not the cost of it. Cheap is the fact that they can stand it up as a commodity and they can tear it down very quick, right? It's not necessarily the fact that it's going to be lower cost on a balance sheet somewhere when someone says, okay, how much are we paying for infrastructure, whether that's cloud or on-prem, right? Or whether that's a public provider or on-prem. They look at the cost of that as far as their operational cost and what it means to them. The faster they can get it, the better it is, right? And the idea is they're creating and managing these workloads to run anything, right? There's not a set fixed way to go do this. They'll take whatever they can get just to get these new applications up and running. So from that view or the lens of we see financial services, what are some of the things that we're doing, right? And what's our view of this and some of the ways we're aligning our company towards helping solve some of those challenges and really enable our financial services customers to start leveraging and accelerating their ability to use data. One of the things we're really doing is trying to create a set of data services that enable a cloud-like approach, right? Whether that's leveraging public clouds and making that a viable option for our customers, which highly regulated, I've been running a model that's very different, but we really want to enable a set of data services that enable that as an option, right? And really harness that value and that scalability and that agility that the cloud providers allow. We also want to enable you to build your own versions of those, right? I mean, a lot of the customers we look at, and we talk about some of the things we're doing with our cloud services with, let's say, Google, they go, that's great. I just want to do that in my data center, right? So we're helping a lot of customers now build those versions of the cloud, but do that inside their data centers, right? And build very consistent data services regardless of where that's going to be. But yet at the other side of that, you still have that legacy run environment that's there, or heritage, depending on what customers you're talking to. How do I now take that and make that more economical, right? How do I not compound that problem of I never reduce the cost of that? So we want to help modernize those current environments. Still give the same experience from an application landscape perspective for apps that just aren't going to move today, and certainly businesses that are going to stay where they are for a set period of time, allow you to drive cost out of those environments through modernization techniques, data modernization techniques, and enable you to create a new model, and then maybe fuel and fund some of those other initiatives out there. And that's fundamentally the approaches that we're looking at, and these are the three pillars that we look across. So what is the concept? So the data fabric has been a strategy for us. It's actually a little more than that now. You'll hear later on some of the things we're doing as far as elements to this and platform elements to this. But it really was a strategy we started with. And the concept of the strategy was, in order to help our customers reach their digital initiatives, right, and drive their data challenges, we wanted to build a cohesive ecosystem of services that are interconnected, that allow you to choose any one of the consumption models you want, whether that's an enterprise IT model, a next-gen DC model, or leverage public and multi-cloud offerings, but do that in a very consistent way. So you don't have to have a data strategy for every one of those different use cases. You can build a very consistent strategy regardless of how you eventually evolve your environment. So if IT decides that, hey, we've been able to get through some hurdles on looking at the public providers, and there's a set of services we really want to use, those should be available without having to do a complete rewrite and change of my data environment just because I'm going to leverage something from a Google or an Amazon or Microsoft Azure, right? So we really want to build, and that was the foundation for this, right? So when we look at some basic elements like, every single financial service institution that we work with has to have encryption. It's not even an option, right? Everything's got to be encrypted. Well, if I can create a very consistent model on how I do that, regardless of where I deploy, it moves the needle, right? We believe that it helps you accelerate your ability to have different options and look at different and have different choices when you think about what I'm going to do in my next decision, or if I'm going to build that very specific team that's going to go tackle one problem. They can go and tackle that problem, do it, but it still fits the foundation of what an enterprise company needs to do to meet those needs, right? So take a big company that's got a legacy challenge they have and translate that into a way that still allows them to be very competitive in a smaller startup that's got zero foundational requirements like you would have in a legacy company. So what are the elements that we look at from the data fabric, right? So number one is freedom of choice. Right? You should be able to consume and deploy services, right, regardless of where and what it's going to be on, right? So whether you're going to build that on-prem or whether you're going to build it in the cloud or leverage colo providers, the large-scale colo providers, we're providing those data integration services that are going to allow you to do that, right? That's our focus. You'll see us less focused on the platforms themselves, more focused on the integration of 25 years of data services capabilities and integrating that. And that's really where the difference between a storage platform company and a data service company is. That's one of the reasons why we're doing it. Future-proof, right? Some of these options may not be available to you today because you haven't gotten through the gates yet with whether it's the way you're choosing, the applications haven't been rationalized yet, the IT departments don't have the funding yet, you haven't gone through the security challenges or the hoops that your CISO office is going to let you go through. The idea is if you make a decision today that's based on what I need, you're not going to be locked into that decision, and it's going to be an inhibitor for you to make a future decision, right? We want to be able to give you a path that allows you to adopt new technologies and new innovations as they become available and as you can get through that, right? And we were going to partner you with on. The other thing, it has to be efficient, right? This cannot be something where I have to unbolt and rebolt every single time. You want to be able to maximize the efficiency of that, whether it's through how quickly I can stand up those services, how quickly I can tear down those services. It also has to be most cost effective. I need to be able to do that with a model that makes sense, that maps to or is better than the current services I have when I start to evolve those services. And the last one is it has to be secure, right? Security in financial services is still dominant, right? Regardless of the new models or the requirements or the innovation you're trying to drive, security is still the dominant model. In fact, our security profiling across everything we do at NetApp is modeled against our most stringent financial services customers, right? And for us, security is almost the dominant reason for us to deploy or manage any of our new services that we're delivering, right? And so that's very important, certainly, we think, in the financial services landscapes, right? So we created a snapshot of what we're doing These are the sets of services, right? So when we look at the data fabric itself, right, and our ability to accelerate, we've got a set of services that we look at, right, and that we manage to, and we put these in a few buckets, right? So if it's, looking at building out a new DevOps a model, why? Because the amount of applications that you're writing, rewriting, and developing is exponentially growing year over year, right? In fact, I was working with one of the banks, and they have about 5,000 core applications, which is just a massive amount, right? And in their journey to get to a modernized approach to this, they could rationalize about 8% per year, right? If you think about that. How long are they going to get to an end game? It's going to take a long time, right? If I could say, based on our integration with them and our working with them and providing a set of data services, I can move that to 15%. That's a massive move, right? That's value. That's what we're focused on, is the ability to accelerate those capabilities, right? Build a service provider-like model. One of the advantages that we have in segmenting our business is we get to see different industries and then apply that back to what financial services is trying to do, right? Every one of our customers, certainly financial services, they're trying to become more of a service provider for their organizations, for their business. And that transition from more of a build, run, operate model that IT has traditionally been to more of a service provider model, right, where you've got a tailored set of services, right? That's the model we want to get into. Our experience with our large service providers and the hyperscalers is helping us really redefine models that allow us to do that, right? In fact, one of the things that we're bringing to market is what we call private cloud storage service, right? And this is the ability to create your version of our Amazon service, right, our volume service in Amazon, and do that inside your data center, right? But it's the exact same experience, right? So we see that as innovation that we can take to our customers and partner with them to help them build new models, right? And then, of course, things like gain better data center efficiencies, protect and secure the data, right? And whether that's, doing a traditional model or looking at, new options in that space, but still understanding the concept that you've got a lot of regulatory and compliance issues you still have to get through, right? How do we better align into that model? So these are all things that we're looking at, and we're working with, and certainly want to continue working with you folks around building and continue to advance a lot of these services. Any questions? So you'll hear a little bit more about this today. I'll be around through the rest of today and into the cocktail hour later, so thank you.